This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com in review. What I'm looking at today is 2011 Hellraiser Revelations. And this is, by some people's reckoning, the worst of the Hellraiser movies made. And I wouldn't quite go that far. It's certainly not good, but it's so easily redeemed that it mystifies me that it was released in the state that it was. For those of you who aren't aware, Hellraiser Revelations was written by Gary Tunnicliffe, who was the makeup artist on past Hellraiser movies. Well, I should say, some of the lesser Hellraiser movies. And it seems apparent to me Gary Tunnicliffe does not quite understand Hellraiser. And you see this tendency exemplified in 2018's Hellraiser Judgment. So Hellraiser Judgment is a very interesting movie regardless. Tunnicliffe doesn't quite understand what Clive Barker was doing. And I might take another look at Hellraiser Judgment and explain why in detail. So let's focus on Hellraiser Revelations for now. The story of Hellraiser Revelations revolves around two young people who are going to Tijuana to get laid, which in movies is the only reason to go to Mexico, typically. And they encounter the puzzle box, open it, and chaos ensues. The movie moves back and forth between the two young people and their family, and as I said, just a lot of chaos and violence ensues, which is typical for Hellraiser movies. Though as I said, this is not a very good movie, and it's so weird how easily it could have been made a better movie. For instance, to happen upon the lament configuration when seeking to get laid sounds like something out of a Porky's movie. It is the dopiest idea. Though, with a rewrite or two, it could have really worked. Because, keep in mind, because they're young does not mean that their lives can't be hard. There are tons of young people going through really terrible shit all over the world. So the fact that you're dealing with young people doesn't mean you have to be so trite and cliched as having everything revolve around a trip to Mexico to get laid. As I said, it's almost condescending. What I think they should have considered was maybe have these young people be outcasts, social pariahs, essentially. And through the internet, they learn of the lament configuration. In other words, research. And they try to seek it out. Though, hell, and by the way, when Clive Barker calls where the Cenobites come from hell, he does not mean the literal biblical depiction of hell. He means it in a general sense. It is not literally hell. So that's also why, going back to my point about Hellraiser Judgment, Tunnicliffe does not understand what Barker meant. He is not talking about a literal hell. And in fact, I would argue in Clive Barker's scheme of things, there isn't a literal hell. There's just many hells. The Cenobites reigning over one. In any case, back to Hellraiser Revelations. And so these two young people would be seeking the attention of the Cenobites. And the Cenobites would reject them because they haven't yet plumbed the depths of their depravity, you see. So you would then have these two young people going about killing people, committing crimes of various sorts, egged on by the Cenobites in various ways, which is to say, the Cenobites are helping them blossom to become the worst of themselves. So on the fringes, the Cenobites are always present, goading them on, giving them the tools to commit havoc. So they're on a murder spree all over the country. And at the very end of the movie, the Cenobites give them what they want. only to have the young people discover that what they wanted is not what they wanted. I think that's a really interesting idea. I think it does credit to young people, though perhaps it's too topical in that in the United States, it seems every other week people are shooting each other, whether they're young or not. And so that would probably be a very difficult pill for the studios to swallow. So I think it would have been a much more effective movie. As I said, the depiction of these two young people is really problematic because they're very whiny and they've lived not much in the way of actual lives. For them to so easily access the lament configuration is a problem, which I addressed in how I would have improved the movie. Though, if you look at their family, it only reflects it in that they seem a bit screwed up, like most families, truth be told, but very well off. In other words, in the world of Hellraiser Revelations, what's happening is primarily happening because these kids are bored. They have nothing to do with their time, and their parents are rich, and they're looking for diversion, which is not in and of itself a bad way to go. But to do that, you have to give these characters actual dimension. You have to give them actual life. And Gary Tunnicliffe, as a writer, is not capable of that. Or if he is capable of it, for whatever reason, he chooses not to do it because he creates outlines of people. And the problem with outlines is that unless everything going on around them is so interesting and so fascinating, you're not interested because they don't hold up. And that, by my reckoning, is the greatest problem with Hellraiser Revelations. It just doesn't hold up from the start. It can only go down. And that's a pity because I think, as Hellraiser Judgment has shown, Gary Tunnicliffe can do interesting things. I don't necessarily think they're accurate to what Clive Barker was trying to do, but they're interesting nonetheless. Though, let's take a minute to consider the most egregious problem with Hellraiser Revelations. Namely, they try to replace Doug Bradley's Pinhead. Though that's not the problem. The problem is they try to replace Doug Bradley's Pinhead with an actor that looks vaguely similar, though different enough that it's fairly obvious that it is another actor. You don't do that because, at least by my reckoning, it comes off a little bit disrespectful. Never mind that viewers will know that it's not the same actor, and they will treat your movie accordingly. Don't do it. If you're going to change the actor who plays Pinhead, change the actor who plays Pinhead, which is to say, go the route of Hulu's upcoming Hellraiser reboot. Continuation, whatever they call it. Which is to say, you create a character that is visually different than Pinhead. The woman who's playing Pinhead in the Hulu movie does not look like Pinhead and is not trying to be Pinhead in the sense of the visual. And that's the way you go. Make a clean break if you're going to take that route. And I would advise, personally, that you don't take that route. Introduce a new Cenobite. This is what Gary Tunnicliffe did in his Hellraiser Judgment, and I thought that was really clever. In any case, introduce a new Cenobite. Introduce someone new in the hierarchy of hell. Not literally hell, but the world, the dimension that these Cenobites live in. Show us something new. You don't have to use Pinhead as a crutch, ideally. He is the most recognizable character in Hellraiser lore. but that doesn't mean you can't reach beyond him and create something new if it's necessary. And it was certainly necessary in Hellraiser Revelations. There's also a lot of criticism of Victor Garcia's direction. And it's not terrible. It's not great, but it's not terrible either. And it's certainly no worse than what you see in typical Hellraiser movies. And it's fairly apparent that the studio has stopped investing major resources, as in money, in these movies. It's relatively inexpensive, and that doesn't help anything either. If you're not going to trust the filmmakers with enough resources to fully realize their vision, you can't be too shocked when things don't work as well as you would like them to. So what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com in review. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a follow. Peace.